easy, get what I drive. Set up, and set for my spot. I bet you I'm moving, I bet to show me how.
The truth. Resolve to resist.
Hi, welcome back to another episode of Stand on Guard. I'm your host, David Krayden, coming at you live from our nation's capital here in Ottawa. And we've got lots to talk about. We're going to have some fun at the beginning here because that was Mark Carney making the weird signs. He shouldn't be doing like this. He's doing this. Does it mean something? And when he says, "Hell yeah, rah," I know it's supposed to be French. But is there something behind this? So when we come back, we're going to examine occultic signs to see whether or not there's anything going on here.
The Prime Minister lied and his minions continue to lie.
We need political change.
But we also need to resolve to resist.
Yes, please subscribe if you haven't, or resubscribe if you need to. So many have done that lately. I want to thank you. It's been so nice to come back after my brief illness, and to such support. It's overwhelming, and I really want to thank you for that. And please like the station if you can. I don't even have to tell you that right now. So let's look at this thing, this video here. I don't know if any of you ever watched the Y-Files. I'm sure a lot of you do. The host, AJ, we discovered him about 2 years ago and been watching him ever since. Sometimes he's not producing for a week or so, but this is an episode he did on the Illuminati. And you know he always sort of debunks things at the end, but he shows these occultic signs and symbols, and I think it's worth noting. It's signals can mean something. Let's watch.
Actors, artists, and other public figures are seen using hand signs associated with secret societies. Not only do these symbols influence us, they signal loyalty to the elite. Remember, almost all the Illuminati symbols and rituals involve the occult or Satan. And that makes me think of the stories of Tom Walker, Daniel Webster, Faust, and Robert Johnson. It's the same story. A man dreams of wealth, power, money, or fame. Then he meets a mysterious figure who promises all his heart's desire and more in exchange for his soul. In other words, the celebrities became famous by making a deal with the devil and forming a triangle in front of their face. But some of us see something more than just the gesture. It's a signal of loyalty and obedience, a promise that whatever deal they made, they're holding up their end. Those who hold the triangle in front of their face, especially their eye, that's the signal that they're keeping watch over their audience. They're not just influencing their fans, they're monitoring them. And when they show the triangle, that's an acknowledgement that they're in the hierarchy on one of the steps of the pyramid. And with this sign, the index finger and pinky raised with the middle and ring fingers folded down. Basically, the rock-on gesture, also known as the goat. This symbol represents the Baphomet. It signifies rebellion against the established order and devotion to Illuminati's global control. Now, what about the hand gestures celebrities make, like forming a triangle or covering one eye? Now, I can't prove Justin Bieber isn't in the Illuminati, but I'm pretty sure he's not part of a group controlling the world.
I heard that if you play Despacito backwards, it says, "Eat bugs, live in a pod."
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Despacito.
I'll admit it's tempting to imagine what the world would be like if Kanye West was in charge.
Yeah, him no.
I believe that my calling is to be the leader of the free world.
Okay, maybe not Kanye. But the truth is, these celebrities are making these signs because they think it's cool. And the ones that know about the Illuminati story are doing it just to be edgy. Because if I was in the Illuminati, I want a lot more colonels and soldiers and a lot less, well,
Despacito.
Yeah, so a little bit of fun at the start here, but the question remains, Mark Carney's a globalist, and how deeply embedded is he in that globalist system? A lot of them, we know the occult is very popular amongst this elite. So it's a legitimate question. As is, what the hell happened between Mark Carney and and Donald Trump? And yes, it was a joke. It was an act. It was a farce. Mark Carney out there every day. We're going to go to war with the United States. This is our biggest fight of our life. Donald Trump is the biggest enemy of Canada. It was all what I said in December. They were going to run against Donald Trump, not against Pierre Poilievre. And as soon as the election was over, peace, man. It was all over. The fight is over, and now Donald Trump and Mark Carney are the best of buddies.
In rebuilding relations with Canada, and if so, how?
No, well, I think we're going to have a great relationship. He called me up yesterday. He said, "Let's make a deal." You know, he was running for office. They both hated Trump, and it was the one that hated Trump, I think, the least that won. I actually think the conservative hated me much more than the so-called liberal. He's a pretty liberal guy. But no, I spoke to him yesterday. Couldn't have been nicer, and I congratulated him. You know, it was a very mixed signal because it's almost even, which makes it very complicated for the country. It's a pretty tight race, but he's a very nice gentleman, and he's going to come to the White House very shortly, within the next week or less.
Isn't that sweet? Just like old friends. And of course, they are old friends. As I've mentioned before, Brookfield Asset Management bailed out Jared Kushner's $500,000, billion, whatever it was, apartment complex in New York City. Donald Trump has always been grateful for that. And of course, they've had other associations in the past. So it was all a farce, this big battle between them. And drives you absolutely nuts. And of course, who gets stuck in the middle? Pierre Poilievre. Oh, he's too much like Donald Trump. Pierre Poilievre says he doesn't like Donald Trump, and Donald Trump really got mad about that. But as we'll show later, it might have something to do with the fact that Pierre Poilievre would not meet with Donald Trump Jr. Who do you think gave him that bad advice? Maybe his campaign manager? Jenny Byrne? I don't know. Maybe Jenny did it. But it's the same bad advice Pierre got about don't meet Christine Anderson. And we'll get into that in a while. But let's talk about Pierre's race. Or actually, let's, the elbow was up thing. There it is from 1984. And that's exactly what this campaign was about. Lies and deceit and hyperbole and euphoria and absolute nonsense, trying to convince us that Mark Carney is going to get Donald Trump, that Canada somehow is going to be on an equal footing with the United States and is going to demand our rights. Well, it didn't happen, of course. So here's how the election is still in the process. The Liberals are now up to 169. They're literally 3 seats away from a majority. God help us. God help us if they get that majority, because that means we've got at least 4 years. And as we're going to go into, I've got Jeff Rath on tomorrow, and we'll talk about that more. But Jeff Rath is on tomorrow to talk about the viability now of Alberta separatism. And it's incredible how the numbers are shooting up because of Mark Carney. Nobody in Alberta believes he's not still the champion of net zero. And with Quebec saying no pipelines, Alberta feels like they're boxed in the corner. So that's where the numbers still are. And what about Poilievre? What happened to Pierre Poilievre in his riding? Because how does a guy who, and I remember when he won his first election, and it was called Nepean Carleton in those days, and it was 2004. So he's had that seat for 21 years. How does he suddenly lose a seat as the leader of the official opposition, who could have been prime minister that day, who could have won that election? Don't you think a majority of people in his riding would have said, hey, I want to vote for the guy who's the leader of the opposition, or could be the prime minister? Yeah, you would think so. Let's have a look here. Now, I know this is old news, but look at the 91 names on the ballot. People probably gave up looking for Pierre. I mean, this is absolutely ludicrous. Why did this happen in Pierre Poilievre's riding? I wonder why. And this is enough to drive you batty. Now, my friend Mark Petroni, and I was on his radio show this morning talking about the election results. He's saying, how in the heck did he get 80% participation in that riding? And Mark has really been questioning, not Elections Canada, no, but he's been questioning, but what was going on in that riding? Because clearly there was something amiss. And before I get to the next slide, this is quite interesting. If I can find it. This is a guy who worked. I'm going to take this off first, eh? Yeah. This is a guy who worked in the he was just basically collecting ballots. McKeever is his name, and he's been deluged with media requests. But here he is talking about another aspect of the election. Why did the media call the election so early when some very populous parts of Ontario had not even been decided? Not to mention Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC. Why did the media do? I know you say it's based on an algorithm. It's based on how people vote, how people are expected to vote. But when you make that call so early, you have influenced how voters in the rest of the country are going to vote, because so many people are stupid enough to say, hey, I'll vote for the winner. I want to be on the winning side. There are a lot of people who vote that way. I mean, that's imbecilic, but a lot of people vote that way. Let's listen to Mr. McKeever.
Something is really fishy with what's going on with this election here in Canada. I was supposed to be working for Elections Canada tonight in Durham region, which is just east of Toronto. And so what my job is when the votes are done at each polling station, they get brought to the office. I was there to make sure all the packages were sealed, all the documentation was in order, so then the votes can be tabulated and counted. Not a single vote in Durham region had been counted yet. None of them had been brought to the office yet. Then I go on my phone and I see CTV declaring the Liberals the winners. It's like, how is this even possible? Here we have, one of the biggest areas just east of the GTA, Pickering, Ajax, Whitby, Oshawa, Uxbridge. Not a single vote counted. And then, CTV says the Liberals win. And then CBC follows in that. This reeks. How is this even possible? Something's fishy. Something's not right. There's got to be some sort of investigation into this, because it's not right.
Apparently something was not right, but he's, I've seen other interviews with him. He's not questioning that there was deep corruption in the voting, but there was something amiss in terms of how many people were voting. And I find it interesting that the media should not have made that call. They had no right to make that call. So here's another reason. This is from Alexandra Lavoie. And I don't think anybody else has pointed this out. This is interesting. Have you ever heard of the phrase gerrymander? Well, it's actually named after a Congressman, Jerry, who had his writing subdivided into such a, and so it looked like a salamander. And so just so he could win the next election. And so that's how the term gerrymander came about. Congressman Jerry, salamander, gerrymander. This is what I would call reverse gerrymandering. Now, this is interesting. Pierre Poilievre had his writing totally changed by bringing in all kinds of other people in the last 4 years. So this is another reason he lost this election. Now, do you think the Liberals had something to do with how that riding was now constituted? Did they ensure a more liberal part of Canada was allowed into his riding? I think so. But this is absolute travesty. Yeah, absolutely. But this is another reason why Pierre lost, because people are saying, how could he lose after 21 years? And that's another reason. Now, this is, I think, very significant. The debate goes on between why the Conservative Party lost. And Chris Pavlovski, and I want to say at the beginning before I forget, because I do have a tendency to get carried away and forget the message I have to say. If we're trying to get a hold of Chris Pavlovski, we have for quite some time. He's a Canadian expatriate living in the United States. He's the co-founder of Rumble, along with Don Jr., actually. And we would love to have Chris on the show to talk about how we can maintain free speech, because the organs that we're currently using could disappear as organs of free speech. And I won't be more specific than that. But we're expecting an Online Harms Act under Mark Carney. He's already said he's in favor of reviving the Online Harms Act, which is basically the blackest censorship any democracy has ever tried to implement. That's the bill with the thought crimes component, where I could be under house arrest if my neighbor says, I think Krayden is going to say something hateful. Cops come to my door, lock me up in my house. Yes, that's exactly what could happen. And it's also like $100,000 fines for speech that is designated as hateful, or prison sentences. Now, Rumble is a free speech organ. They don't censor the material the way other vehicles out there do. And Rumble is essential for the continued freedom that all of us broadcasting right now really need. So I would love to get Chris on the show. And if anybody out there has more information on Chris Pavlovski, I've tried to get a hold of him through Viva Fry. That's been unsuccessful. But this is a free speech issue. And I should emphasize, Chris is the chief executive officer and co-founder not co-founder. He's the sole founder. I don't know why I had the idea that he was a co-founder. But anyway, when I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I admit it. Just like Mark Carney says you will. Okay. Anyway, Chris is saying that he tried to arrange a meeting with Pierre Poilievre and Donald Trump Jr. And Pierre Poilievre's people said, forget it. We don't want to meet with Don Jr. Probably because, the optics might look bad. Just like Pierre Poilievre forbade his MPs to meet with Christine Anderson, who was on this show about a month and a half ago, and whom I met at an event in Ottawa about a year and a half ago. Wonderful woman. Speaks for freedom, fights for freedom. Yet she was dismissed by Pierre as a far right person, and I won't even go any further because worse things were said about her by conservatives. 5 conservatives did actually meet with Christine Anderson, and they were probably yelled at behind closed doors for that. But I have a lot of time and respect for Christine Anderson. She's not far right, whatever that really means. And she certainly isn't some sort of Holocaust denier. Far from it. So anyway, Chris is saying that that's the reason Donald Trump doesn't like Pierre Poilievre. And I would say maybe that's it. Because Donald Trump puts personality over policy in many cases. You make Donald Trump mad, he'll never forget it. Never forget it, never forgive you. Even if he agrees with you on policy. And this I find absolutely fascinating. Because this could be the reason Donald Trump kept saying, I don't like Pierre Poilievre. I don't like Pierre Poilievre. Because he sees Pierre Poilievre as slighting his son. Donald Trump's very much a family guy. Donald Trump is very much he judges you on your personality. You're rude to his family, he doesn't like you ever. That's the way Donald Trump behaves. And I think that's the way a lot of us behave. You would probably act the same way. Even because I've known conservatives, I've worked for conservative people, I've worked for conservative MPs who are horrible people. And I have no time for them today. I don't care what their policies are. If your personal credibility is not there, then you forget. And that's what Donald Trump is judging Pierre Poilievre on that incident alone. And that's the problem. But here's Eva Shepyuk, who's been on this show as well. And she's that wonderful Edmonton lawyer who was a Freedom Convoy attorney. She was the one who got Justin Trudeau on the spot when she said, when did you start fearing Canadians? And why did you lie about demonizing the Freedom Convoy people as misogynist and racist and whatnot? I have a lot of time for Eva. She's going to be on the show again soon. And Eva makes the point, as a lot of people have, and I've made here day after day. And I better bring myself back on the screen, or I'm going to stay in the shadows forever here. But Eva makes the point that Pierre waited far too long to go on podcasts. He waited far too long, and then he went on very few. And he was offered the opportunity to go on some of the biggest podcasts in the United States, like Patrick Bet-David, for instance. That's just one. But I've heard Patrick Bet-David say they called the Poilievre campaign up 3 times and were hung up on 3 times. And apparently Joe Rogan also tried. These are people that get millions of viewers, not just in the United States, but in Canada. And he needed to reach out to everybody. And not just demonize the mainstream media. And the mainstream media never has liked Pierre Poilievre. They've always hated Pierre Poilievre. But he had to deal with the mainstream media, but at the same time, reach out to these podcasts that overwhelm, that subsume the mainstream media, that are becoming more important than the mainstream media. And his campaign staff never got that. What are they living in? They think it's still 1990? They don't get it, that the media has changed. And Poilievre only started getting that in the last week and a half when he started appearing on a few podcasts. He needed to do that every day. As it's been pointed out, Donald Trump had mass rallies, but Donald Trump went on every bloody podcast he could find. So I want to play a clip here, which I find is absolutely fascinating. And this is in the fallout of this election, we've got two premiers whining, both of whom think they can replace Pierre Poilievre. Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston and Ontario Premier, you know who that is. But listen to this.
A federal election. Last time I checked, Pierre Poilievre never came out in our election. Matter of fact, him or one of his lieutenants told every one of his members, "Don't you dare go out and help the PCs." Isn't that ironic? But anyways, I'm not going to dig deep into this.
I think the Conservative Party of Canada was very good at pushing people away, not so good at pulling people in, and I think that they probably saw that in some of the results they had across the country.
I'm just going to pause it there because you might not know Tim Houston. You all know Doug. You all know the Ontario Premier, who did nothing to help Pierre Poilievre out in this campaign. And now it's, well, why didn't he help me out more? But Tim Houston, I've never heard of the guy. Now, Tim Houston is a red Tory, like the Ontario Premier. He's a red Tory who has links to green energy, net zero programs that Mark Carney is associated with. So he hasn't, technically, he has not come out publicly and said, I'm for net zero. But he's associated with companies that may be owned or associated or linked to Mark Carney. And he is linked to a company that has a net zero policy. So that's very important. Is he going to come out and say, I'm for net zero and I want the Conservative Party to embrace net zero? Because you know Mark Carney is all for net zero, and Mark Carney is going to start enforcing net zero as soon as he can. And there is definitely a link here between this premier and the net zero policy because of his link to a company. So let's return to this and listen to Andrew Scheer.
I think the Conservative Party of Canada, well, I hope they do some soul searching on, what they believe it means to be a conservative. There are many, many shades of blue.
You have two Conservative premiers saying it was the strategy employed, that essentially Tim Houston said the Conservatives are pushing more people away than pulling in. These are Conservatives. This isn't me just making it up.
It's just demonstrably false by the facts. I mean, the facts are it doesn't make sense.
Why didn't Pierre Poilievre talk to Tim Houston or talk to Doug Ford? Isn't that weird?
You can't simultaneously say we push people away when we got more votes. That's just factually incorrect. That doesn't work on a mathematical level. I don't know what else to say. I mean, we got more votes, we got a higher percentage, we won more seats. Clearly, we weren't pushing people away. We reached historic highs. That's just a nonsensical statement that doesn't hold up to a second's worth of scrutiny.
But it's coming from a person who clearly feels like there was no outreach to the people who supported him and to him himself, right?
So supported who?
Tim Houston.
I'm not sure I follow the question.
He's making that statement based on what he has observed and his own experience, which he did. Well, he has said that there was no outreach, for example, from Pierre Poilievre to him.
So
has
his
Doug
feelings
Ford.
are hurt?
I don't know. I'm just conveying what he said, and I understand what you're saying, but I can't discount what two Conservative premiers are saying. Like, Doug Ford is the premier of the most populous province in the country. Like, does what he say not matter at all? Like, if he feels that no outreach was done to him or his supporters, isn't that something to just take stock of?
I just don't believe that's true. And again, we're in this not because we were worried about interpersonal relationships with someone like Doug Ford. We're worried about the people in Ontario who are affected by terrible Liberal policies. That's who we are listening to. That's who we're thinking about doing that outreach to and getting them on side and addressing their needs. And I'll point out, Pierre Poilievre got more votes in Ontario than Doug Ford did. Pierre Poilievre got a higher percentage of the vote than Doug Ford did.
Won a third majority.
More people in Ontario. More people in Ontario wanted Pierre Poilievre to be Prime Minister than wanted Doug Ford to be Premier. That is just the facts. So, do we have some work to do? Do we have to figure out next steps? Obviously, Vashi, we didn't win the election. that hurts, and it hurts for a lot of people who are counting on us. And that is who we are focused on right now. Those people who place their trust in us, the thousands of volunteers, the candidates who put their name on the ballot, the people who have lost their jobs and remortgaged their house to pay for bills. Those are the people that we need to talk to and show that we're still going to keep fighting for them. And that is what Pierre is doing. Ever since Pierre launched his leadership campaign, he has been consistent. He is fighting for those people who are left behind by Ottawa. When Ottawa caters to special interests, when the Liberal government rewards their friends and imposes a crazy ideology. I mean, Mark Carney has written a book extolling the virtues of the carbon tax. He said he's going to keep the carbon tax on the industrial side. That means job losses in places like Regina and Hamilton. So those are the people that Pierre is focused on. I wish Conservatives at other levels around the country would help, would be more cognizant of that it's about the people. It's about the people that they represent as premiers or as other politicians. It's not about settling interpersonal differences. I don't think Canadians care about that. I think Canadians are worried about how they're going to pay their mortgage, how they're going to move out of their home and start their parents' home and start a life for themselves.
But don't
and
Canadians
that's what we're going to be
also want to
focused
see,
on.
for example, somebody who is running to represent?
Yeah. Sorry for the cutoff there, but I want to correct one thing I said about Tim Houston. He's not personally, as an individual, affiliated with this company. His government is subsidizing a windmill company that is sending its profits outside of Nova Scotia, and it's a net zero company that he's very enthusiastic about. So why would a progressive conservative premier be involved in this kind of project? This question has to be asked. And the problem here is we've got two red Tories now trying to take over the job of Pierre Poilievre. Yeah, I know they're both saying, I'm for Ontario or I'm for Nova Scotia, but it's murky. And you can bet they've got designs on the job that Poilievre has, and of course, ambition to be prime minister. And that is, without a doubt, going something that we've got to watch out for. I'm going to show you my merchandise clip, and I'll be right back with some more commentary. Yes. Just to wrap up here, a couple of things I wanted to say. So, if Mark Carney gets this majority, God help this country. The only hope we have is that if this minority government collapses in the next 6 months, because I can tell you, Alberta is seriously considering independence, separation, whatever you want to call it. And I've got a guy on tomorrow, Jeff Rath, who's been on the show earlier. I think it was about 7-8 weeks ago. We had Jeff on the show. He's the guy that's leading a contingent, or has led a contingent already, actually, down to Washington to discuss Alberta separating and becoming the 51st state, or at least an independent nation first. He's going to be on the show tomorrow to talk about how popular separation has become. And it's hovering at about 30 to 40% in a poll that was taken in March. And we'll look at this in detail tomorrow. Now, that poll is probably, if you took it today, it would be much higher. And you can't really blame Alberta for considering this, given the fact that they really are concerned about what a Mark Carney majority government or even a minority government is going to mean for them. So that's a real concern. But to get back to the beginning of the show, it is unbelievable to me that Mark Carney got away with this. That he campaigned as a stalwart opponent of Donald Trump. And the day after the election, he can't say enough nice things about Donald Trump. And it's a love-in. It's a love-in. And they just think each other is wonderful. So who do I blame for this electoral defeat? A lot of people. I blame the Conservative campaign for not allowing Pierre Poilievre to be Pierre Poilievre and to articulate more conservative policies or to address things like the conviction and sentencing of Tamara Leach and Chris Barber. He never said a thing about that. And I think that really offended a lot of people, offended me. But what we face in the future is the potential breakup of Canada, and it's catastrophic. And Mark Carney has gotten away with this, pretending to be a visceral opponent of Donald Trump, when in fact, he's never been. It's all been an act. In fact, everything about Mark Carney's election campaign, much like his run for the leadership of the Liberal Party, has been a facade, has been an act, has been a farce. But he's apparently gotten away with it. And where is the outrage in the mainstream media today over this cozy relationship he has with Donald Trump? I thought Donald Trump was the enemy of Canada. But now, of course, as Prime Minister, now that he's won a mandate, he can't say enough about Donald Trump. So this has been gross hypocrisy, and I don't see any outrage because somehow liberals are allowed to kneel at the feet of Donald Trump. Conservatives aren't allowed even to shake his hand. It's that hypocrisy, that double standard, that sickens me. And it's that double standard that constantly chased Pierre Poilievre during his campaign, with forcing him to go on and on every other day about how much he was going to oppose Donald Trump. And it was all an act on Mark Carney's part. So tomorrow, Jeff Rath, this is going to be a fascinating conversation because, my God, we are this has been the most bizarre election of my life. And it's been the most catastrophic aftermath of my life because the potential consequences here are absolutely devastating. And every day that goes by, I feel like I'm losing the Canada I grew up in. And that's one of the reasons I wanted Pierre Poilievre to win this election. Because he talked about the Canada I grew up in, where we had good jobs, affordable housing, in fact, a home you could own, and safe streets, pride in the flag, pride in our military, and family values. He talked about those things, and the government minding its own business. That's why I wanted Poilievre to win this election, because I knew Mark Carney doesn't believe in any of those things as a globalist. But right now, the Conservative Party has to resist all attempts by Doug Ford and Tim Houston and all those pundits out there calling themselves conservatives who want the party to move to the left. They need to fight for the soul of the Conservative Party because it needs to be a real alternative to the Liberal Party and not just liberal light. And that's what's going on as well right now. We're fighting for Canada, but the Conservative Party needs to fight for its identity because there's going to be tremendous pressure on the Conservatives to move left, to adapt, to become more like the Liberal Party. Happens every time. And Poilievre needs to stick to his guns and say, my message is working. We just needed more time. And perhaps a little less self-confidence, a little less belief that it was inevitable, and more participation in this media out there, the new media, the independent media that wants change in this country. But there's going to be real pressure on the Conservative Party to move to the left, and they must resist it. Otherwise, there'll be no alternative to the globalist, socialist, woke identity that is shared by all the other political parties, with the exception of the People's Party of Canada, obviously, but the other parties in this country. And that needs to be the other fight. So we'll be back tomorrow with more about the Alberta separatist bid and what's happening and what's potentially going to happen. Thanks for watching today. We love you. God bless you. God bless Canada, as long as it's still Canada. And Godspeed to all of you. This has been David Krayden, coming live from Ottawa, still our nation's capital. Bye for now.